where stories aren't told to impress you, but to reach you. Let me ask you something deeply personal. Have you ever wished that someone, just once, would look at your child not with pity, but with the same warmth they give any other kid? Today's story begins with a simple mistake, a moment so small it could have been overlooked. But for one mother, that moment cracked open something she had sealed away for years. A memory, a name, and a truth buried beneath quiet tears. If you believe that a single honest sentence, spoken without fanfare, can melt the armor of loneliness, then please take a second to like this video, because the softest stories often stay with us the longest. The morning air in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, carried a quiet crispness that only early autumn could offer. The golden light filtered gently through the wide windows of a small wooden diner nestled on the corner of a sleepy main street. Inside, the smell of coffee, maple syrup, and pine wood mixed softly in the stillness. The breakfast crowd hadn't arrived yet. Only a few regulars sat scattered at distant tables, murmuring into their mugs. Rachel Prescott stepped inside quietly, as she always did, not so much entering a room as blending into its silence. She was poised, well-dressed in a simple navy wool coat and tailored jeans, her dark blonde hair tucked neatly into a low bun. A woman like her could have been mistaken for a CEO on vacation, and in a way she was. Rachel was, in fact, one of the leading minds in educational technology in the country. But no one here knew that. No one knew much of anything about her. That's how she liked it. With her was a boy, no taller than her waist, walking slowly, carefully, wearing oversized noise-canceling headphones and clutching a pack of colored pencils like they were his shield. His name was Dylan. 7 years old. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. Rachel guided him gently to their usual table by the window, the one farthest from the counter, away from noise, and bathed in soft sunlight. She laid a napkin in front of him, and Dylan immediately began to draw, his small hands methodical and calm. The corners of his lips twitched just slightly as his orange pencil skated across the cloth in looping swirls. Rachel didn't interrupt. She never did. This was his sanctuary. And maybe, hers too. From the kitchen, a new waitress emerged. She moved with the quick, eager energy of someone still memorizing table numbers and trying to look like she belonged. Her name tag read Emily. She was in her mid-20s, with wavy auburn hair pulled into a high ponytail, and a light in her eyes that hadn't dimmed yet from the weight of too many double shifts. Spotting Rachel and Dylan, she approached with a practiced smile and notepad in hand. "Hi there," she said warmly. "What can I get you two this morning?" Then she paused, just a heartbeat. Her smile widened a little as she added, almost offhandedly, "You two make such a sweet pair. Are you brother and sister?" Time stopped for Rachel. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just looked at the young woman, for a second too long, as though the air had been knocked out of her. The quiet hum of the diner seemed to fade. Before she could respond, Dylan reached across the table and offered Emily a half-finished drawing. Crayon streaks ran across the napkin, the early shapes of a child and a cat, drawn in orange and purple. Emily leaned in, crouching slightly to be eye level with him. "Oh wow," she chuckled. "My little brother used to draw cats like that too. Superhero cats with capes and goggles. He said they saved the city every Tuesday." Her voice was light, playful, nostalgic without knowing. Rachel turned her face toward the window, quickly, too quickly. Her shoulders rose slightly as she blinked hard. Her lips pressed together. And then, without a word, a tear escaped the corner of her eye and slid down the collar of her coat. Emily, sensing something, stood upright. "I'm so sorry, did I say something wrong?" she asked, her tone shifting to a careful softness. Rachel shook her head gently, still not looking at her. "No, you didn't," she said, voice low and even. "It's just—" But she didn't finish. Instead, she reached for the menu and handed one to Dylan, who didn't look up. He kept drawing. Emily stood there a moment longer, then quietly excused herself to get their drinks. She didn't know what had just happened. She only knew she had said something ordinary, and somehow it had opened a door she hadn't meant to knock on. And across the room, at that corner window table, a mother who had built her life on logic, control, and distance, found herself undone by 6 simple words. Emily returned to the counter, flustered, still clutching the napkin with a half-drawn superhero cat. Her cheeks burned as she filled a glass of water with trembling hands. The look on that woman's face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was something else, something she couldn't quite name. A kind of grief that had no warning label. Taking a deep breath, Emily walked back toward the table, determined to apologize. She stopped just short of it, clutching her notepad like a shield. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice softer now. "I didn't mean to assume anything. I just thought, you looked so much like siblings, sitting close like that." Rachel finally turned to her, meeting her eyes. There was no sharpness in her gaze, only something cloudy and worn. She shook her head slowly, a faint, almost broken smile pulling at the corners of her lips. "It's all right," she said, voice low. "No one's ever thought I had a brother before. But maybe I once had a daughter." Emily blinked. Sorry." But Rachel didn't clarify. She just looked down at Dylan, who was now shading in the cat's tail with a quiet intensity, utterly absorbed. Rachel reached out, gently tucking a strand of blonde hair behind his ear. Emily hesitated, unsure of what to say. The moment was heavy, delicate, as if a single wrong word might shatter it completely. I'll give you 2 a minute," she offered gently. Rachel nodded without speaking. Emily turned and walked away, but her mind stayed rooted at that table. What did she mean? "I once had a daughter." The past tense lingered like a ghost. It wasn't her place to pry, and she knew that. Still, something about the woman's voice, the way she said it, didn't just suggest loss. It ached with it. So Emily did the only thing she could think of. She returned to her job. She brought menus to the table by the jukebox, refilled coffee for the man in the flannel shirt at the bar, picked up plates and balanced orders on her tray with robotic rhythm. But every time she passed the corner table by the window, her eyes flicked toward the little boy in headphones, still drawing, still silent. And each time she'd smile and say something small, a whisper tossed into the still air like a paper boat on a quiet river. "You're my favorite artist today," she said once, setting down a small plate of toast. Or, "Hey little man, save some creativity for the rest of us," with a playful wink. Or more than once, "Cutest little brother I've seen all morning." Rachel didn't respond to most of it. But Emily noticed something shift, not dramatically, but just enough. The woman's hands, once clenched tightly around her coffee mug, began to relax. Her eyes, once fixated on the corner of the table, started to follow Dylan's pencil strokes across the napkin. At one point, Dylan looked up. Just for a second. His eyes met Emily's, pale blue, soft and curious, and he didn't smile exactly, but his fingers stopped moving, and his head tilted just slightly, like he was listening. Even through the headphones. Emily gave him a little wave. He blinked once, then went back to his drawing. It wasn't much. But to Emily, it felt like sunlight breaking through cloud. She hadn't meant to say the wrong thing earlier. But maybe it hadn't been wrong. Just unexpected. And in this quiet wooden diner, on an otherwise ordinary morning, perhaps that was enough. The check had been paid. The plates cleared. The breakfast rush had come and gone, leaving the small wooden diner in a lull of clinking cups and muted conversation. Rachel remained at her table by the window, staring at the empty napkin in front of Dylan, now filled with swirls of orange, purple, and blue. He had drawn quietly through the meal, headphones still firmly on, lost in his world. Emily had tried not to hover, but something about that mother and son pulled her attention like gravity. She'd never met them before, but the moment she saw them walk in, it felt like her chest tightened with a memory she couldn't quite place. As she wiped down the counter, She heard her name, soft but clear. Emily. She turned. Rachel was standing now, her coat draped over her arm, one hand resting gently on Dylan's shoulder. Her expression was calm, but something rested just beneath it, something fragile. Emily quickly stepped over. "Yes, ma'am." Rachel looked down at Dylan, then back at her. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for how you treated my son." Emily blinked, a little startled. "Oh, I was just doing my job." Rachel shook her head. "No, you weren't." There was a pause. Rachel lowered herself back into the booth, gesturing for Emily to sit across from her. Emily hesitated, then slid into the seat. Dylan remained beside his mother, still drawing. Rachel's voice dropped, quiet and raw. "Most people look at him and see a diagnosis. A burden. A boy who will never be like the others. But today, you looked at him like he was just a kid. Like someone's little brother." Emily's breath caught. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "I didn't even realize I said it like that." "You did," Rachel said. "And it mattered." For a moment, they sat in silence, the hum of the diner gently filling the space around them. Then Rachel continued, her voice thinner now. "I had a daughter. Her name was Abby. She was 5 when she died. Heart failure. It came out of nowhere." Emily's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. "She was Dylan's big sister," Rachel said, her gaze fixed on a distant spot outside the window. "They were inseparable. She used to hold his hand at the doctor's office. She was the only one he'd let take off his headphones." She smiled faintly at the memory, but it vanished just as quickly. After she passed, Rachel went on. "He stopped smiling. Stopped talking. He used to laugh at silly things, cereal commercials, rubber ducks, but after Abby, her voice cracked. It's like the part of him that knew how to be happy just shut down." Emily felt the sting behind her eyes. She nodded slowly, her hands trembling slightly on the tabletop. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I know that kind of silence. My little brother, he stopped laughing too. When our sister died." Rachel looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. There was something unspoken in her eyes, recognition, maybe. A shared ache. "What was her name?" Rachel asked. "Grace," Emily replied. "She was 11. Car accident." Rachel nodded, slow and reverent. "I'm sorry." "Me too." Dylan shifted slightly, reaching across the table to offer Emily his drawing. This time, it was finished. A tall figure with long red hair stood next to a smaller one in purple headphones. Between them, a yellow cat with a cape. Emily took it gently, her fingertips trembling. "Is this me and him?" she asked. Dylan didn't respond, not with words. But he looked at her, really looked at her, and for a brief second, the corner of his mouth lifted. Just a little. Rachel watched the moment unfold, her hand resting over her heart. "He hasn't smiled like that in years," she whispered. Rachel sat quietly for a moment after Dylan handed over the drawing. Her fingers curled around her coffee mug, but she wasn't drinking anymore. Her eyes, once focused on the boy beside her, now lingered on Emily's face, not with judgment, but with a quiet kind of study. Emily shifted in her seat, the drawing still in her hands. She was about to say something, maybe thank her, maybe change the subject, when Rachel reached slowly into her purse. She didn't rush. Her movements were careful, almost ceremonial. She pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. From one of the inside pockets, she slid out a small photograph, worn at the corners, the colors faded by time. She placed it gently on the table between them. "I want to show you something," Rachel said softly. Emily leaned forward, curious, until her eyes landed on the picture. It was a hospital photo, the kind taken when a child stays too long in a place meant only for emergencies. A little girl, no older than 6, sat on the edge of a hospital bed. Her brown hair was tied back with a pink ribbon. She wore thick-rimmed glasses that were slightly crooked, and her smile was lopsided, like she wasn't sure whether to be brave or scared. The badge on her gown read, Abby Ross. Emily's heart stopped. She stared at the name, then at the girl's face, and then at Rachel. Her voice came out barely louder than a whisper. That's my sister." Rachel's breath caught, but she didn't look surprised. It was as if she had known, or at least suspected, the moment Emily first said her name. Emily's hands trembled as she reached toward the photograph, but she didn't touch it. "That's Grace's twin," she said, her voice cracking. "Abby. We lost her when I was little. I thought no one remembered her but us." Rachel looked at her gently, then reached across the table and placed her hand on top of Emily's. "I remember her," she said. Emily blinked hard, fighting tears. Rachel continued, her voice thick with emotion. "She shared a room with my daughter, Anna. They both had heart conditions, different ones, but they became inseparable. Abby hated needles, and so did Anna. But somehow, if they were together, they could face anything." Emily's lips trembled. "I used to bring them coloring books," Rachel said, her eyes glistening. "But they'd always end up drawing on the backs of hospital forms instead. They made each other laugh. It was the only time I saw my daughter smile during those months." Emily let out a quiet sob. She didn't try to hide it. "I remember your name," Rachel said. "You used to come in with your parents, and Abby would show you her drawings. You were just a kid, but you always brought her little stories. Paper ones, folded like books. She'd read them to Anna at night." Emily covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The memories were crashing over her now. Abby giggling with another girl, the rustle of paper in hospital beds, her mother's tired hands brushing her hair back while Abby slept. "I didn't know she had a friend like that," Emily whispered. "I thought she was alone." Rachel squeezed her hand. She wasn't. For a long time, neither woman spoke. There was no need. The air between them was heavy, not with sorrow, but with something unexpected. A reunion neither of them knew they needed. The convergence of two lives long separated by time, grief, and silence. Dylan, still beside his mother, looked up from his coloring, sensing the stillness. He leaned his head against Rachel's arm, his small body seeking quiet reassurance. Rachel reached down and brushed his hair softly, her other hand still holding Emily's. Tears streamed freely now, on both sides of the booth. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just the kind of crying that came from a wound that hadn't been touched in years, suddenly reopened, and gently cleaned. It was no longer just a mistake. It was a connection. A week later, the air in Jackson Hole had shifted, just slightly. The early autumn mornings still carried a gentle chill, but there was something new stirring in the breeze. Something hopeful. Inside the Community Arts Center, a crowd had gathered. Nothing extravagant, a mix of local families, teachers, volunteers, and parents with children of all ages and abilities. The room was decorated with hand-painted banners, paper butterflies hanging from the ceiling, and crayon rainbows that lined the windows. Laughter mingled with music from a modest speaker system. It wasn't a gala. It wasn't polished. But it was real. At the front of the room stood a new sign. The Abby and Dylan Foundation, creative expression for kids with special needs. Emily stood near the welcome table, still adjusting the name tag clipped to her cardigan. It read Creative Guide. The title made her smile, not because of what it meant for her, but because of what it meant for the kids she would now get to work with. She had said yes without hesitation when Rachel had called. It wasn't just an offer. It was a calling she hadn't realized she'd been waiting for. Rachel approached quietly, her presence as graceful as always. But there was something different about her too now. Her eyes were less guarded. Her voice, when she spoke, carried more softness than steel. "You ready?" she asked. Emily nodded. as I'll ever be. Rachel gestured toward the small stage at the center of the room. He wants to show something. The two of them walked together, stopping just off stage. Dylan stood nearby, holding a large sheet of paper in both hands, carefully, like it was something sacred. He was wearing his headphones, as always, but he looked calm, grounded, focused. Rachel knelt beside him, smoothing the crease on his shirt. "You've got this, buddy," she whispered. Dylan didn't respond with words. He simply nodded, then stepped onto the platform. The chatter in the room quieted. Parents leaned forward. Children sat cross-legged in the front row. Emily held her breath. Dylan turned the drawing outward for all to see. It was simple, childlike, and radiant. A girl with long brown hair, wearing glasses, stood beside a boy in headphones. They were both holding paintbrushes, working on a giant rainbow that arched across the page. The colors spilled out in wild, joyful strokes, reds, blues, purples, and golds that almost danced off the paper. At the top corner, in Dylan's uneven block letters, were the words, "Sister and Brother." The room was silent for a moment, that sacred kind of silence that only follows something honest. Then the applause came, slow and swelling. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. Emily did both. Rachel joined her son on stage, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. Then, to everyone's quiet surprise, she reached for Emily's hand as well and led her forward. They stood there, the three of them, beneath the soft glow of paper butterflies and crayon rainbows. Rachel looked at Emily, her voice low, meant only for her. "I never thought I'd get to say this again," she said, her throat tight. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to call you my daughter." Emily's heart clenched. She nodded through the tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." There was no fanfare. No camera flash. Just the weight of something sacred returning, not to erase the past, but to gently thread it into something new. A new beginning. If you believe that even a simple mistake, just a few unexpected words, can become the bridge between hearts long broken apart, then leave us a like. And don't forget to subscribe, where the quietest stories stay with you, long after the screen fades to black.